Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. I have two really dynamic women today joining me. Of course, one of my all-time faves, Wendy F. Adams, CFRE, and she's going to be talking with us to Ellen Heydon, MASC, also CFRE, about development directors and hiring and if we're ready to go there. I know this is going to be a great episode, ladies, because in the green room, we covered hair, skin color, eye color, weather. We talked about it all in a short period of time. So you know it's going to be a good episode, right?
Which is all tied into, are we ready to go there? Don't you worry, it's all coming together.
I love it. I think you're absolutely right. That's a hoot. Well, you know what all comes together is the amazing support that we have from our presenting sponsors, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, our new episodes just dedicated to fundraisers every Friday. I do that show with Tony Bell, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that really make things happen. Again, I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, joined today by, we always laugh that we think that we're long lost sisters, Wendy F. Adams, CFRE, Cultivate for Good. I'm on the West Coast, Wendy's on the East Coast, and our other co-hosts are scattered throughout the country, super diverse in the areas that they serve. They have different opinions, different experiences. It's one of the cool things of the Nonprofit Show. Wendy, don't you think, to have these different voices?
Exactly. It really is a picture of the sector. So I love it.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It's a picture of the sector. That's a cool way to look at it. Well, a big part of our sector is having these amazing people like Ellen Heydon on today. Ellen, welcome as founder and consultant of Excellent Designs LLC. We're going to really pick your brain today.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready. I've had my coffee. We're good to go.
And you're warmed up because tell us where you're coming to us from.
Yeah, Southeast Minnesota. So we're a bold 33 degrees today.
Lord. Oh, I can't even. I just got the chills with that, Ellen. I really did. I have to admit. Well, we're going to be talking about, this is kind of a tricky deal, hiring a development director. And so let's start off and have you share with us kind of like, what's the current situation? Like, what's going on across the nonprofit sector with development directors?
Yeah, so the first thing I always like to share is that there really isn't a direct path to fundraising when you look at it through a career standpoint. Is we've got individuals that are coming from, maybe they've been teachers or they've been working in a specific sector in the world, and now they're coming into fundraising because they're passionate about the mission. And so it's really important that we're taking into account that because there's no direct line feeding our development directors, the more we turn them maybe off on whatever it is we're doing, the less likely we are to keep them in the profession at all, because they've seen what it's like outside this profession, right? We're not in this for the glamour. We're not in it for the dollars. We're working in nonprofit. And so when you start looking at development directors, we're looking at, it takes 3 years to build a fundraising program, but most development people are staying in their first job or in any job a total of 16 months. That's not 3 years. And so when you start looking at how are we building a professional development cohort and being able to sustain our fundraising efforts when we're not even making it a year and a half with the same individual and we're always restarting. And so turnover is high. It's extremely high. And a lot of it is a lack of culture of philanthropy, which I know you guys discussed earlier this year. And it's the idea that our board of directors doesn't quite understand fundraising themselves. And so when they set their expectations for how well this fundraiser should do in their first year, we're setting ourselves up to not be successful.
Ellen, where's the tissues? Because I'm full. I'm so full. Just been sitting in that space for my 12 and a half years. The last 6 were as a development director. And just in that space, everything that you said, we talk about falling into nonprofit, which we're walking away from that, right? This is a profession, but the math isn't mathing.
Correct.
To build, but we've got 18 months that someone's there. And they're the champions. They're the champions,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not equipped. So everything you're speaking about, we need to be speaking about. So everybody strap it on, because we've got to be ready to do better in this space, but we've got to recognize where we are. And that's where you're taking us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to talk about the negative, and so it's one of those that you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know, it takes 3 years to build a fundraising program. And yet we're having constant turnover in the field. We're wondering why we're not being successful, and then wondering, is it even worth having a development professional on staff? So you end up in this cycle of, well, it hasn't worked, so it's not going to work.
Well, it's only negative when we stay there. It's an opportunity for growth when we recognize it and we move forward. So there we go. Right?
I love that. I think that's like wow. I can tell you that you've been in development, Wendy, because that's a success. That's a successful attitude, right? For hearing no or the negative, you've got to recalibrate and turn that around. Wendy, I want to ask you this question, and I want to bump back to Ellen's comment about the 3-year development path. What are your thoughts on that? Because I haven't had that many folks on the nonprofit show, and we're coming up on our 1200th episode, actually boil it down to a number like that. We know that the development director, horrible stat reported on by AFP, 16 to 18 months. But talk to us, Wendy, about that 3 years. Does that hold true for you?
It does. And I'll tell you, for me, the foundational reason is because in the 2 opportunities that I've had to be in this space, I think come into a pipeline. So not only are we talking about relationships have to be built, ladies, but I got to have something to build from. So if there's no pipeline, that is where you're seeing the length of that time expand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, Ellen, what do you think about that? If you have a pipeline, can you get around that 3 years, or does it pump you to 4 or 5? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think even with a pipeline, you're going to still end up around that 3 years. I mean, when we talk about fundraising being about building relationships, and that is how the funds come in, is that it's still going to take 3 years to build those relationships to a point of really understanding the donors and understanding what their passion is as well, and how it plays into our organization's mission.
Wow. Well,
I mean, Ellen, what are you thinking? Sorry, Julie. One of my first major donors that I encountered started as a $25 a month child sponsor. That's why 3 years is some of that reality, is because they're going to see, what are you going to do with that first small gift? And is this a one-hit wonder? We're looking at the donor, that they're looking at us that way. How are you going to interact and engage with me as it relates to impact? Are we really partnering in this? So I think that's what speaks in. Are you seeing that, Ellen?
Absolutely. It again goes back to, how are we stewarding our donors? We're not here to just make transactional fundraising. If that was the case, we could all use online fundraising and you wouldn't need any nonprofit. But nonprofits are here to build relationships, and they're here to impact outside of the individual we're currently working with. I mean, every conversation you have, from the custodian to the program director to the CEO, all matters in fundraising. Right. And if we're not building that up, we're just asking for lack of success. I mean, really, we're just following the norm and going with it, and we're not channeling what could be.
Right. I love that. And I think that's a missing piece for so many, shockingly, for so many organizations. I mean, really incredible. So you've kind of set the groundwork, and not to be like, oh, this is a boo-hoo moment, but this is why we need to be thinking about this, because it's not just a magic wand. You hire somebody and then voila, all the money starts coming in, which I think a lot of boards think that's what's going to happen. So Ellen, talk to us about these 5 factors of hiring a director of development. Walk us through what some of these things should look like for us.
Yeah, I actually found this quite shocking as I was doing the research into it of the ED, the executive director, needing to be fluent in fundraising. And so many times we ask our executive directors to be masters of all things, and we're not setting them up for success. So when you look at bringing in a development director, what are we doing? So as far as mastering fundraising, it in terms of an executive director, that looks like, have they done an annual appeal? Do they know what it's like to send out a mailing and get money back? Do they have a system to account for those donations that come in? What's their stewardship look like? That's key step number one. Key step number two is going to be talking about whether or not our executive director has run an annual event. So many times in fundraising professionals, we hear that, oh, we just need to do an event. We just need to bring people. They just need to know we're doing the things. Any fundraiser is probably going to go, development professional doesn't really want to run an event. They want to make those relationships, and events are great fundraisers, but not necessarily great fundraisers. And then after that, we've got, what else does an executive director have to do to really understand? And it's, have they made an ask? This feels like such a basic question in fundraising. Have you actually made an ask face to face? Right. And if you can't say yes to all three of those answers, I wouldn't even start a job description. You want to master those so that your fundraiser or development professional comes in and feels like they've got the support of the CEO or executive director.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah. I think that in the trajectory of my work in the nonprofit sector, that has been one of the biggest shocks. To see, like, why is CEO A so successful and CEO B, who I think has a better program, is not. And to me, a lot of times it's boiled down to the ability to ask and do fundraising. And I don't think that we talk enough about that. We layer this in to the development director and their team, and we put all that pressure on them, but we don't often come back to the CEO and their direct leadership. What do you think about that, Ellen?
I think it's exactly what we expect, right? Is that if I hire somebody else, I don't have to do it. When in reality, before they hired their first development professional, they were all secret fundraisers, and they aren't ready to acknowledge that they were doing it, maybe just not doing it super well, or they were doing it super well, but they also then were able to focus on the other work that needs to be done to operate that nonprofit. It's a fascinating kind of catch-22 if you look at it that way. Of as soon as we hire a development professional, we think, great, they're going to take care of it all. And reality is leadership and board of directors are even more involved in fundraising once a development professional is hired than before.
And that's what the culture of philanthropy tells us. So we can't ever step away from that. That is what is woven through. Julia, to your point, one executive director or CEO to the other is when one holds onto that as this is our foundation, we all do this, and don't step away like we've arrived and now we don't have to be in that space. I tell people often, I drink water, I don't walk on it. So there's that point in time where they're not miracle workers when they come in, right? Back to the time that it takes. But exactly, you don't hire someone, even with all of their credentials, they still have to adapt to the culture that you have. And those stakeholders that they're speaking to have to get to know them. Take them alongside, introduce them to those relationships that you have, CEO or ED. It never stops. That process is not supposed to stop.
So then let me ask the two of you, because I'm fascinated by this. How do we get our boards and our leadership, and dare I say our communities, to understand this, to realize that we need this 3 years. We need to be planning through this and not just putting it on the desk of that new development director, who, as Ellen pointed out, might only last 16 months.
Well, Ellen, I don't want to take away. You want to jump in with an answer?
Yeah, I mean, my first answer is going to be, well, I think we have to keep talking about it. The more we talk about it, the more things will change, right? That's how everything in the world works. The more you talk about it, the more impact you make with it. I think the other key thing is our development professionals need to advocate for themselves. So many of us are worried about what's next and will my paycheck come from here? But the reality is most nonprofits don't have a development professional, and so you can jump from one ship to the next as needed, which is not what the board of directors wants to hear. But some of that building a development profession into your organization requires having to invest. And I'm going to give it 3 years before we make a decision on whether or not you're doing what we expect. And it can be negotiating it into that contract, into that annual review. I'm a big proponent of that. I think if we start advocating for ourselves, we're going to see the results change. And if we're not going to put up with, you didn't meet my expectations, see you later. It's like, that's okay. I've got somewhere else I'm going to go. Like, here we go. Let's do it again. And just, I think we have to learn, unfortunately, that sometimes really great things get lost because we don't take the time to cherish them the way we should.
I couldn't agree more. And what jumps off from that is when you said we've got to talk about it. Here's some key places. It's got to be in the strategic planning conversation. We've been talking about that all week. It's not an afterthought. It's got to be woven in. There's that 3 years. And invite your board members and stakeholders to those development opportunities we have for professional development. Put them in the room with you. The next time that you're going to be going to a workshop or signing up, let them hear it from the sector and not just your voice. And I think that keeps that conversation going.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I would say that that's one of the places we really fall down, is that we don't bring our board members and even other C-suite folks into those trainings, into those conversations, so that they can see what goes on, because that just opens your eyes and your heart and your brain to what it takes. It's not dialing for dollars.
That's it. And it demolishes any of those potential silos, whether they're built already or they're starting to formulate, when they can be in the room and hear it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. Ellen, one of the things that you talk about in the factors, and I want to touch on this briefly with you, and this is so important, is understanding CRM software platforms that allow us to understand what we have. I mean, both of you ladies mentioned there might not be a pipeline. There might not be a donor database. Help us to understand what we should have in place, or what we should be looking for these development directors to lead us into.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, are you tracking your donors in general? Is there some kind of system currently set up where you're taking in their first and last name, their address, and maybe it's an email or a phone? Maybe it's nothing more than that, and it's in an Excel spreadsheet. That's great for some really small nonprofits, because purchasing a donor database sometimes isn't practical for some of those nonprofits until they've grown in those 3 years, where now that spreadsheet is cumbersome, running reports is not accurate, and then you need to look into it. There's so many great resources out there for beginning your term in CRMs and understanding them, and the support for them is fantastic. But it's not for everyone. Right off the bat, in those first year of hiring, and you don't have a CRM, I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker, but I would say it's something you want to make sure is in your strategic plan, that we are probably going to need a CRM within the next 3 years if we expect this program to grow the way we think.
Absolutely. It cannot be an afterthought. It's not going to get there on its own. We have to be a part of making it a reality. And I'm feeling old, but when I started, there weren't as many options for CRM. Right. So I agree with you, Ellen. It's not a deal breaker, and you don't have to jump out the gate, but it should be within that 18 months, because there are so many more options. And, we've got lovely choices written behind us. There are options out there that you can start to build in, and they have different levels. So maybe you're not jumping to platinum, but you can enter in on that gold, just to be able to make sure that you don't miss opportunities to report back on impact, because you're not going to remember it all. You've got to be able to speak that out, and in a meaningful way that's intentional for individual donors.
I love that you brought that up, because I think you're absolutely right. I think that a lot of times we think, oh, we're all in or we're not in at all. And I do think that most of these CRMs do have graduated programs, certainly by the number of files that they'll take or donors, the things that they're tracking. It really can grow with you and your not only the capacity you have for managing a system, but your budget and the things that you're working with, right? I mean, if you start off with 100 donors, that's a heck of a lot different than 500.
It absolutely is.
Absolutely.
So you do have to be a little bit more strategic. Let's move on to another kind of aspect of this, and this is an interesting aspect of, as we were saying, life, expectations. This is, and we were laughing about in the green room, because expectations of your mate, the people you work with, your government, the mailman. I mean, setting expectations kind of helps us navigate life, right? Talk to us about this, is when we're looking to hire a development director, how do we even know what our expectations should be?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to do is whether it is with somebody outside the organization who understands fundraising, before you even hire, to come in and do a SWOT analysis. What are our strengths in fundraising? What are we struggling with? What are the threats of our organization? How do we even know where to start, right? Mm-hmm. From there, you've got a baseline that's going to tell you, great, we have 5 donors that give us everything we need for the year. Okay, we have a lot of growth we can do. We can grow, even just doubling that is 10. Like, whoa. It's having the realistic expectation of knowing your own data. So again, going back to, as long as there's some sort of record, whether it's in an Excel spreadsheet, it's in a donor database, whatever it might be, you're going to use your actual data to set your benchmarks, and it's going to be realistic and not going to just be, well, we want you to double our profits or double our income. It's okay, great. If we can put that expectation out there, but that's very unlikely to happen unless you found a unicorn, which I mean, if you found a unicorn, great, but in terms of reality, that's unlikely. When you look at what kind of data points to be looking at, it's what's your retention rate? How many donors are giving year after year? What's your acquisition rate? If you're sending out an annual appeal and you're not finding a way to add new people into your fold of donors, we're struggling, right? So we've got to set up some sort of metric that talks about what is our donor acquisition rate, what's our renewal rate, and then what's it cost to keep a donor? It's a lot cheaper to keep a donor than it is to find new. And sometimes it's having to break it down to that dollar for dollar for organizations to understand how much and cost effective it is to retain donors versus having to always acquire new year after year.
Mm-hmm. Expectations must be coupled with a plan. We can't have that there's an expectation out there and no plan to go with it. The arbitrarily, we're going to go 10% higher. That's the goal, or 20%. From what? How are we going to get there? I love the example. Well, we've got all of our dollars came in from 3 donors. We're not going to go to 25. Oh, how? And I think that's it, is making sure that when you're sitting down, doing that SWOT analysis. I love that. Before you even bring the first person in to sit with the panel and have that hiring conversation. But then when you are in that conversation, please make it conversational. Allow that person, and then I'm screaming out to those who are sitting on the other table sitting there wanting that position, ask your questions. How to get to where you are today. Be bold in that space, because you're going to need to be bold when it's time for your review. So start there.
So Ellen, do you advocate having this in place before you ever hire somebody versus having that development director come in and then form this up? And Wendy, I'd love your opinion on this as well. Like, where do we start?
I think an organization's more likely to retain their next hire if they've got a plan in place of, we know this is where we currently are, this is where we want to be. We've done X, Y, and Z. We're ready to take it to ABC. Like, I mean, it's truly, you're going to have, I would say, more success with somebody who feels that there's support behind it. And that looks like having some kind of plan ready for them to come in and begin. and not having to start from scratch. Some people love starting from scratch, but when we look at the turnover rate of 50%, gosh, starting from scratch every other time feels like a heavy lift.
I couldn't agree more. What you were
Really?
saying in that space is we want you to partner with us. So we're at least coming to the table with where we are and here's where we want to be. What do you think? You're from the beginning in the process of hiring saying you're going to be a partner, a thought partner in this space. And I think that that will take our 16-month turnover. And that's where we start to make changes in a positive way. Ellen, I couldn't agree more.
You know, that's not what I thought you would say. I really am. I'm kind of taken aback by this, and probably because I haven't invested a lot of time in this thought. But it seems to me that you're hiring somebody to help you figure this out. But at the same time, I see where you're going with this, is that the expectation is going to be all warped if you don't have a starting point. And you really interesting phrase, thought leader. Oops, it looks like I just popped off. Up here, I'm back. The thought leader aspect, to say, yeah, you're going to partner with us and help us lead and maybe chart a little bit of a nuanced course.
Hold it loosely and let them do the job that you've hired them to do. But let's have a starting point that we're gonna work from and discuss. Yeah, that's what's going to change what we're talking about today.
Yeah, really interesting. Ellen, when you think about this and you think about, pulling people in, how surprised are candidates going to be if there is a program? Will they judge the organization whether they have it or not? Like, what does that dynamic look like?
I think you're looking at how exhausted is this person looking for the next job, which is really a funny way to look at it. Is those that are new to the field, that are really energized. I'm here. I know this is what I can do. I'm really confident. They haven't maybe run into a roadblock or a hurdle that's kind of set them back, or it might be their first development professional job. I mean, I would say I've been in the field not as long as many, but in my time I've had 6 or 7 different positions, and I'm not in a place to want to rebuild every time. Sometimes it's nice to get to come in and know you're making a difference immediately because you're implementing and you've got the backing of the board and the leadership, and everyone sees that philanthropy is important. And you're not having to build that culture right from the start every single time. That can be exhausting. It's a heavy lift. And when you work in nonprofit, you often take your work home with you, whether you try to or not. And it's so much. So I look at it as those that are coming into the field, they're really excited. They're really happy to build that program, and it really builds their own resume. But that's also why they're leaving the organization, is they found another opportunity that's going to pay more for them to do the same thing again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation. And it's so funny that you would say that, because we've had several comments that have come in during this live part of our show. And one of them is from somebody that wants to move from programs management into development. I'm like, yay, team, go. We want you. Come on. But I love this conversation, Ellen. I think it's been incredibly thoughtful and realistic. I mean, Wendy, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right?
It isn't. But look, Ellen, you said it so well. They're coming in with fresh ideas if it's their first, or even you want them to come with fresh ideas if it's their 17th. There's going to be an opportunity. There's so many facets to what we're doing in the sector. There'll be an opportunity to build. You don't want them to have to build everything. And I think that's the place and space. That's exhausting. We know we're coming alongside those with some deep needs. And it's not work that's taken lightly. Let's give the best starting place that we can. And what we're talking about today are some really key places that we can address. So great conversation.
It's been amazing. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. I've heard some things from you that I haven't really heard from other guests, which is saying something, given that, we've been doing this for 5 years, and we talk a lot about development because fundraising is, critical to our missions. And so it's been really fun to have this. And Wendy, I'm thrilled that you've been able to be part of this discussion, because this is where you've lived and where you continue to live.
It's been a joy.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Ellen Heydon, MA, CFRE, founder and consultant of Excellent Designs LLC. You can find more about Ellen and her work at excellentdesignsllc.com. And Ellen, this has really been fascinating. You've given me, actually, I'm going to call this out. You've kind of given me a reason to hope for extending that time that our development directors are staying with us, because there's been a lot of hand wringing. I mean, we had Mike Geiger on, the president of AFP, to talk about this last year, and yeah, hand wringing, but not this action towards why is this happening and how can we keep it. It's not just about paying higher salaries, it's setting some ground rules and getting successful. So this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is one of those I could talk on for hours. I feel it's one of those things that once you get into it, it's just so interesting to learn what it is we can do better.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that attitude. And we do need to do better. We really, really do. You know, the Nonprofit Show could not do better than having these sponsors, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out so we can provide these amazing conversations like we've had today with Wendy and Ellen. So I want to make sure that we express our gratitude. The other thing that we do is we sign off every day with this mantra, and today it means something a little different to me. I hear it a little differently each and every day, and it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thank you, ladies.